Daniel chapter 8, let's read just the beginning so we can see historically where we are as far as dates. Okay. So, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar. Okay, this is the last Babylonian king of the great Babylonian Empire, which goes back, way back, several hundred years. Of course, one of the main kings being Nebuchadnezzar. This last king is actually the oldest son of Nabonidus, who is at that time on war, so he's the last king. He's going to be the last king that's going to be taken over by the Persians, by Cyrus the Great. So Daniel was about 15 or 16 when he was taken into captivity around the year 606, actually exactly the year 606, with some of his other young people. So now if you calculate here, we're about 550. Because this king reigned from 553 to 538. Which is a pretty long reign, actually, with his father. So it's interesting because if the chapter before it doesn't follow chronologically, it's actually later, but this is earlier, so it's not always chronological, but that's okay. There's a lot of these visions given to Daniel at this particular period of time, which is the end of the Babylonian Empire. You wonder, why about all these empires? Why is this? Why is this? What's the interest of all of this? Well, there's many reasons for that, but basically, the whole point of the visions given either to Daniel or these other kings is to show where history is leading. And also to show that God is the one who is in control, basically, of where he wants history to lead. We might think that things just happen by chance, or because this person rose up as a king or as a president, that's just chance. There's no chances. God is there. Especially in the Old Testament, we can see that. Now, today we might interpret things differently because we don't have a revelation on that. We don't know if this president was there because God wanted, or we don't know that. So we got to be careful with that. But in the Old Testament, when it's specifically, we know that this was happened. So what happened here is we have 4 great empires, beginning with Babylon. Okay, we have the Babylonian Empire. It begins in chapter 2, in the same succession of empires. Okay, we have Babylon, the great Babylonian Empire. We have then we have the Persians and the Medes together, that great empire. Then we have the Greeks with Alexander the Great. And then we have the Romans. Why this succession of empires? Because the book of Daniel is pointing to a time of history when, under that last empire, coincidence, the Roman Empire, at a specific time of history and the history of Israel, comes to the Messiah. Which is not then surprising that at the time of Jesus, and we know that from some of the documents found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that at the time of Jesus, many of the Jews and the leaders were expecting the Messiah. They knew he would come at this time of history because they knew they had read Daniel. Isn't that interesting? And we have found that in some of the writings, like say, left in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Qumran community had a piece of writing, a book that was also found at the same time of these other things. And in there, we see that they expected the Messiah to come about that period of time. And that's, in fact, why the Qumran community was formed, to prepare the people of Israel for the coming of the Messiah. That's why some people think that John the Baptist was the Qumran community, which he was not. But that's another issue. But he did prepare the coming of the Lord. So when John the Baptist is preaching, the Jews and the leaders and the scholars, they know this is when the Messiah is supposed to come. That's pretty fascinating, because they knew the Old Testament chronology, especially Daniel. Now, there's other books that talk about these kind of things, like Jeremiah and other things, but especially Daniel. So that's why we have these empires. So we got to be very careful when we read this. This is not just history. It's because God is showing to Daniel what is going to happen, how these empires are going to succeed, what's going to happen, especially to Israel, because Israel is very important in that history, because without Israel, there's no Messiah. Jesus said to the Samaritan woman that salvation came from the Jews, John chapter 4. So they are the people chosen by God from which this Savior must come. So they're reading that with a lot of attention. Josephus will sometimes in his history of ancient Israel go into to interpret Daniel. Sometimes he'll do a good job, sometimes kind of weird. But anyway, he was going to try that. So the Talmud talks a lot about these things too, but we'll go into that some other time. So we are here in chapter 8, the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar. This is the third year only of his reign, and he reigned actually, like I said, from 553 to 538. So there's a number of years left before Cyrus comes and takes over. Daniel is about 75 years old. Like I said, he was taken into captivity in 606. He was about 15, 16 years old. So if you count where we are now, he's about 70 years old. 75, maybe older than that. So he's getting older. He's not young like me, you know. He's getting old, this guy. So a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after that which appeared to me at the first. So what does he see in this vision that God is giving him? When I saw, I was in the Susa, the citadel, which is in the province of Elam, is another name for Babylon. And Susa is a city. I saw in the vision, and I was at the Ulai Canal. It's actually a river. It could be translated canal or river. It's just a river in Mesopotamia. So I raised my eyes and I saw, and here's what he saw in the vision. I saw a ram standing on the bank of the river or the canal. That's what he sees. And it had, so it gives a river, and there's a ram. It had two horns, and both horns were high, but one was higher than the other. And the other one came up last. What is that about? What is this ram? Well, we'll know if we've read before in Daniel and if we read after, but also in this chapter. Obviously, that is the Persians. The Medo-Persian Empire is compared to a ram. Quite strong animal, has two horns, okay? One is stronger, which is the Persian side. Cyrus was able to create a coalition between those two peoples, which were very close geographically. They created a coalition to take over Babylon. But Persia is a little bit stronger than the Medes, because Cyrus is a Mede himself. So here he is. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. Why westward, northward, and southward? Because he comes from the east. Persia is in the east. It's Iran today, okay? He's charging westward, which is Iraq today, okay? Babylon is Iraq, so there's a lot of land. That's where the armies of the Persians are coming towards Babylon. A huge army coming towards Babylon to take over. If they take over Babylon, it's finished for the empire. That's what it was in the ancient world. You take that main city, it's finished. You conquer where the king is, you kill the king, and you become the king. So that's basically all they had to do to have a victory. So he's charging, and no beast could stand before him, and there was no one who could rescue from his power. He did as he pleased and became great. It's prophetical. It's exactly the same thing we have in chapter 2 and the other chapters, except here's a little different allegory, different imagery that we have here. Now, in chapter 2, the statue there, what is the imagery for Persia? You remember the statue? So Babylon is the gold, the head, and then the arms and the breast is Persia, that's brass. Okay, and then come the Greek, and then come the Romans. So every time it's the same thing, but under a different imagery. You have the same thing in Daniel repeated all over again, all right? So as I was considering, behold, a male goat. Now he sees this ram, and he goes, and he does all of that. And then a male goat came from the west across the face of the whole earth. He comes from the other side. This goat, male goat, comes from the west. Okay. Without touching the ground, and the goat has a conspicuous horn between his eyes. Without touching the ground, here's a goat. Have you ever seen a goat that runs without touching the ground? Like a helicopter or something? I'd love to see that. But this one is like that. Why does it say that? What does the imagery think? When you see that, what are you thinking of this goat? What kind of goat is he? A goat that does that? Pretty fast, isn't he? He's just going, and he's coming from the west. And this goat has a horn between his eyes. The horn in biblical symbolism represents power, strength. Who do you think that is? Yes, Alexander the Great. Coming from the west, from Greece, Macedonia, Greece. He's the son of Macedon. He's the son of Philip of Macedon. So very early, very young, he's going to take over. He's going to come and take over all that area. very, very quickly. He came to the ram with the two horns, which had been standing on the bank of the canal, and he ran at him in his powerful wrath. And if we read people like Herodotus and people like that, we'll see the wars between the Greeks and the Persians. They made movies on that, which are very, very interesting wars. Marathon is one of them. You know why we have the word marathon? It's the war between the Greeks and the Persians, and the Greeks won. All right, and how did they announce the victory at the Battle of Marathon? Well, Greek soldier or Greek runner was chosen and ran all the way to the king and told him, "We won," and died, collapsed. That's the Battle of Marathon, and that's where we get the name of that race, the marathon. All right, good. So, I saw him close to the ram. He was enraged against him and struck the ram and broke his two horns, Medes and Persians. So he gets rid of the Persians. It didn't happen overnight. A lot of fighting between the Greeks and the Persians. The ram had no power to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, trampled on him. There was no one who could rescue the ram from his power. The goat is stronger than the ram, apparently. The goat becomes exceedingly great, but when he was strong, the great horn was broken. Who is the great horn? Alexander the Great was broken. And instead of it, there came up 4 conspicuous horns toward the 4 winds of heaven. Exactly what happened. Now, notice that this is prophetical. This hasn't happened yet. Daniel gets this vision. He's still under the last king of Babylon when he gets that vision. But God is telling you what's going to happen in history. Now, when you read Alexander the Great, the empire of Alexander the Great is divided into 4 parts, okay? We need to know the names of these guys. Okay, we have, first of all, Cassander, who actually married the sister of Alexander. Cassander became the king of Macedon, all right? He the one who founded the city of Thessalonica. His wife's name was Thessalonica, by the way. That's the sister of Alexander. Cassander. And then we have Seleucus. Seleucus, the general Seleucus, becomes ruler of Syria and Asia Minor. And then you have Ptolemy, who becomes, all of that was Greek now. And then Ptolemy becomes the ruler of what? Egypt. Very good. And then you have Lysimachus, who came because little lesser guy, who's a kind of ruler of part of Asia Minor. Talking about Ptolemy, Cleopatra comes from Ptolemy, in the history. Now she's with the Romans and Mark Antony and all of that kind of stuff, but that's much later on. So Cleopatra is a Ptolemy. She comes from this guy. So 4 generals who take over the territory of Alexander. It's important because in the middle of that territory, notice, I wish I had a map to show you, right in the middle of that empire of Alexander, what do you have? Israel, right there in the middle. So you got all these massive empires, these people with a lot of armies and pretty violent kind of people. All guys, they're all around there, and Israel is right in the middle. This is the glorious land that Daniel talks about. This is the beautiful land. Why is it glorious? What's special about that land? Daniel is going to show us, because something's going to happen on that land. What's going to happen in that land? Who is going to be born there? Who is going to be born specifically in Bethlehem? Like Micah said, the Messiah, the anointed one, right? the Son of God. He's got a lot of titles in the Old Testament, especially the main title is the Anointed One, which is in Hebrew Mashiach, the Messiah, which we translate Christ, the Messiah, which means basically then anything else means the King. So when you say to a Greek, to a Jew who knows the Bible, the Messiah you're talking about, you're saying the same thing as the King. That's what it means. They rather use the word Messiah because he's anointed to be king, just like David was anointed and all the other kings. So he's the king. In fact, he's the King of kings. He's the king over all other kings forever. And that's why Daniel chapter 2 begins with the creation or the installment of this kingdom of God which hits all the other human worldly kingdoms. They fall into pieces, and that kingdom grows all over the world and becomes the kingdom that lasts forever, which is the kingdom of Christ. And we are part of that kingdom if we are in Christ. Hopefully we are. It's tremendous. So, here we are. So we have here now these four rulers, and he's going to go into that quite a bit from verses 9 to verse 14. Now here we have difficulties in understanding. Here there's a little bit of ambiguity sometimes in the text, and so there's some disagreements. In Daniel, there's some disagreements on how you understand this, because it's symbolical language, it's about old history. Sometimes we're approximative. For example, I'll tell you the number 2,300 in verse 14, basically nobody has been able to figure really what it is. But what you need to do with these numbers, not look at them as numbers, but as symbols. All the numbers we have in the Bible are not numbers. They're not there to count. They have a significance, just like the number 7. What does the number 7 mean? Perfection, completeness. What does the number 8 mean? New beginnings. After the creation, new beginnings. 7 also is rest. What does the number 6 mean? When was man and woman created? On the 6th day. 6 is right before 7. It's not really perfect. It's kind of a falling off of the perfect. It's not really perfect, but it's pretty good still. That's the human beings. So all these numbers, 4 also is a number of completeness. All these numbers, 12, all these numbers. But so 2,300 has a meaning, I believe, but it's not to be counted. It's just to understand if there is a symbolism, but we'll look at that. Maybe not tonight. I don't know how we can finish. There's so much stuff. Verse 9, out of one of them came a little horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the glorious land. Out of one of them, out of one of these rulers, okay, comes a little horn who grows toward the south. So if he grows towards the south, who is that? Well, who is ruling in the northern part of Alexander's, of course you have Cassander in Macedon, who is then ruling in Syria? Who is ruling there? Seleucus. It's a Seleucid king. That little horn that he talks about is a king that's going to come out from Seleucus later on, whose name is Antiochus IV Epiphanes. That's his name. He's known in history because the book of Maccabees, which is not a canonical book, but a book talks about him. Josephus talks about him because he was the worst persecutor of the people, of the Jewish people during that period of time. And also he desecrated the temple, which is really, really significant. So remember this, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. So that's the guy here they're talking about. So this time of persecution against the people of God is going to be the emphasis in these verses. There's a real persecution here, and you know it's funny in a way because you don't read about it much in the Old Testament except in those books, those non-canonical books that like especially 1st and 2 Maccabees. So I recommend you read those because you have a lot of history there that you won't have here. Why God didn't want us to have that in there, all that, I guess it's kind of gory and not interesting. But here we have a little window into that time of history. It's not the point of telling us about history. The point of Daniel is messianic. Maccabees is telling all the stuff going on. We're not interested. But still, for historical purpose, it would be good. So he moves toward the glorious land. He comes from the north, from Syria, moves south towards, and what is the glorious land? Israel, the land of Israel. He's going to move down there, and he's going to do a lot of bad stuff. So it grew great, even to the host of heaven. Now, he grows, this little horn from Seleucus, Antiochus IV, grows, it becomes big, maybe at least in his mind. And then he becomes big towards the host of heaven. Who is the host of heaven? What is the host of heaven? What does that describe? The host of heaven is God. The host or the army of God, the army, it's the heavenly world. It's the kingdom. He boasts, he's not doing this against the Jews. You would think he is. He is doing this against the God of the Jews. Anytime people attack God's people in the Bible, who are they attacking? God. Anytime people attack the church, who are they attacking? Christ. So when Saul is walking along and Jesus appears to him, what does he say? Does he say, why are you persecuting the church? What does he say? Me. That's the point here. He's trying to get to oppose God. He's fighting a war against God. Now, we might think that's crazy, but you know what? There are a lot of people in our culture that are at war with God. If they could just get rid of that word, if they just get rid of that Bible, if they could forbid us to read the Bible, they would do it. Just like that. Give them that power, they'll do it. It's imagery. He's trying to attack God. He's trying to get the glory of God down here and to trample it. The glory of God is represented by the stars. You know the scriptures that say that how do we know the glory of God? By the heavens. The guy is so crazy that he thinks that he is stronger than the stars. What? When people become so arrogant, they end up thinking they're much more than what they really are. And that's this guy. That's everybody who is proud. No, basically. So he became great, even as great as the prince of the host. And the regular burnt offering was taken away from him, and the place of his sanctuary was overthrown. The burnt offering, what does that refer to, the burnt offering? In the temple. Well, it's the temple where the worship of God. They're burning the offerings for God. The burnt offering is a daily thing that is done regularly to worship God. So he's attacking the burnt offering. That means he's going to come against the, I think it's 163, if I remember the date. He's coming against the temple, and he's going to actually enter into the temple with his horses, and he's going to actually sacrifice pigs in the holies of holies. That's the guy. Imagine that. That's pretty bad. Even Nebuchadnezzar didn't do that. He destroyed it. But this guy is crazy. He wants to offend the Jews. He wants to say to God, I don't care about you. I do what I want. I'm the king out here. I'm the God out here. They really thought they were gods, by the way. But these guys. So he takes away the burnt offering. That means he stops the worship for a time. For a time, not. Yes.
So just a question.
Yes.
Crept into my mind.
Right.
How could he? If a Jewish priest was unclean and entered the holiest of holies,
yes,
was struck dead.
Yes.
How could he go in and not be struck dead?
That's a tremendous point. Here's why. And we'd have to read other things to understand that. It's because the people had turned away from God and they were not under his protection anymore, not even the temple. Why do you think it was destroyed in the first place by Nebuchadnezzar? This is my temple. Get it destroyed. I don't care about the temple. That's what God is saying. I care about your faithfulness. That's just brick and mortar. So it's amazing to think that, but yes, I think God is looking at something else. And I think that's the point. It's because of their unfaithfulness that he allowed these things to happen. And that's in fact why this is prophesied. It's a warning. Because this would not have happened if they had been faithful to God. It would not have happened. That history is dependent also on their choices. Their bad choices. Oh, yeah, that's a good question. So, and a host will be given over to it together with the regular burnt offering because of, look, you answered the question, I just answered it. Because of transgression. That's why God allowed that, because of transgression. And it will throw truth to the ground, and it will act and prosper. This expression, it will throw truth to the ground, applies so much today. Have you ever read a book called The Closing of the American Mind? You got to read that. Published in 1987. A man called Alan Bloom. Well, it's all about, Alan Bloom was a professor of philosophy in a university. He was a Christian, a believer. And he says in the beginning of the book, I know every time my students come into class, the freshmen, And the first question I asked them is, do you believe in truth? And I know, and it does it written, I think, I know that not one of them, even Christians, even from churches, will tell me that truth is absolute. They all believe for sure there's no absolute truth. What we read here, he will throw truth to the ground. Truth is the cornerstone of the church, says Paul in 1 Timothy 3:14. Without truth, we are lost. If the Word of God is just fables, made up stuff, if it's fake news, we're in bad shape. But it's good news. It's not fake news. It's the truth. You know, we need the truth, absolutely. And this world, this culture, I think, is getting nuts in many ways. Why? Why? No truth. Nothing is true anymore. Only my opinion are true. Only my emotions are true. Only what I think is true. Oh, that's your opinion that God exists. No, it's not my opinion. If it's just my opinion, that is not very important. Truth is factual. Truth is based on data. I mean, we can't deny that. So that's what this guy does. He wants to take away truth. That's why he's attacking so much the Jewish people and the temple and all of that. And so that's what we have. This is a battle for truth. No, you're done, priesthood. And he said to me, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. 2,300 evenings and mornings, that's 6 years and 3 months. What do you think symbolically it means? If you think about numbers that I mentioned before. What's the perfect number? 7 is complete. That means that's really is going to last a long time. There's no end to it, 7. So 6 years and 3 months, that's 2,300 evenings and mornings. It means, I think, for a limited time. That's all it means. For a limited period of time, but long enough. And in fact, it's true. It only lasted a few years. It only lasted a few years, and it was finished. That persecution didn't last. And they got their temple back. So we'll finish there. We'll continue.